A frazzled single dad bumps into a stranger and ruins her designer handbag only to find that she's not angry but intrigued and insists on buying him coffee. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The morning began like most others in Jack Harris's life 10 minutes behind. 2 slices of burnt toast and one very determined 6-year-old refusing to wear socks. He hovered in the cramped kitchen, flipping pancakes with one hand and holding a hairbrush in the other. Lily sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, singing to her stuffed llama, completely unfazed by the ticking clock. Jack glanced at the time, then at his daughter's bare feet. "Lily, socks," he reminded gently, trying not to sound as panicked as he felt. "I don't like the scratchy ones," she replied without looking up, her voice matter-of-fact as though that solved everything. Jack let out a breath and crouched beside the laundry basket, fishing around for the soft cotton pair with the tiny rainbows she liked. He found one, just one. He held it up like a prize, then scoured the couch cushions for its mate. 3 minutes later, success. He returned to the kitchen to find a pancake smoking on the skillet. He flipped it anyway. Mornings had always been chaotic, but since Melissa died, they had become something else, entirely a delicate, high-speed ballet of routines and compromises. Jack had gotten used to brushing his teeth while tying Lily's shoes, packing her lunch with the lights half on, and mentally calculating how many days he could stretch a tank of gas. "Breakfast is up," he said, sliding a plate in front of her. Lily blinked. "This one's a little crispy." "It's artisanal," Jack deadpanned. "Handcrafted, charred with love." She giggled, and the sound hit him like sunlight through clouds. Some days, that laugh was all that got him out of bed. They ate quickly. He zipped her coat, found his keys under a cereal box, and hustled them out the door. The winter wind bit at their cheeks as they piled into the old sedan, the engine sputtering before reluctantly starting. Jack gave the dashboard a reassuring pat. "Please hold on today," he muttered. As they pulled out of the driveway, Lily chattered about her class pet and snack time, oblivious to her father's mental checklist of overdue bills, understaffed shifts, and car trouble. But as he glanced at her, in the mirror wide-eyed, hopeful, Jack reminded himself why he kept going. Even on the messy mornings, they were doing okay. By the time Jack pulled the car into the school's drop-off lane, his nerves were already fraying. The dashboard clock flashed 7:54 a.m., which meant he had exactly 6 minutes to get Lily inside, drive 10 blocks across town, and somehow clock in at Brew Bean by 8:00. He didn't even have time to pray for a miracle, just grit his teeth and keep moving. Lily, of course, was in no such rush. She took her sweet time unbuckling, adjusting her pink backpack, and making sure her stuffed llama was properly tucked into the side pocket. "You know, the faster you move, the sooner I get fired," Jack said, forcing a smile as he opened her door. Lily grinned. "Don't worry, Dad. Miss Katie says you should never rush life." "Well, Miss Katie doesn't pay our rent." She blew him a kiss, then bolted toward the school doors with all the energy of someone who hadn't been up until midnight trying to tape a broken science project together with glitter glue and tears. Jack waved until she vanished inside, then slammed the door and pulled away, muttering a half-hearted apology to the crossing guard he accidentally splashed with slush. Traffic was worse than usual. A delivery truck blocked the alley to the cafe's backlot, so Jack had to park around the corner and jog the rest of the way. His fingers were just closing around the shop's front door when his phone buzzed. Text from Brew Bean, Maya. "Please tell me you're walking in now." He shoved the phone back in his pocket and pushed through the door only for the universe to laugh in his face. The moment he stepped inside, a small hand from a tiny customer knocked over her cup of orange juice, which flew in a perfect arc right onto his only clean shirt. The citrus smell hit him instantly. He froze. "Oh no," the girl's mother gasped. "I'm so sorry." Jack closed his eyes. "It's okay, really. Just vitamin C with a splash of panic." Behind the counter, Maya raised an eyebrow as he passed, sticky and damp. "You're late," she said. Jack didn't break stride. "I know," But hey, now I smell like breakfast. Jack pushed through the cafe door, breath puffing in short, frustrated clouds. The line was already 10 people deep, the espresso machine screeched like it was on its last leg, and Maya shot him a look that said, "You're lucky I like your kid." "Sorry," he mouthed, weaving behind the counter and grabbing an apron with one hand while reaching for the order screen with the other. His shirt was still damp from the juice incident, clinging coldly to his back, but there was no time to change. No time to breathe. He took 3 orders in a blur, his brain juggling names, milk types, and muffin flavors like a street performer on caffeine. By the time he reached for his first personal cup of the morning, an extra-large latte, heavy on the espresso, his hands were trembling from stress and too little sleep. He never saw her coming. As he turned, coffee in hand, a flash of ivory caught the edge of his vision. A woman in a sharp, cream-colored coat, stepping away from the counter, her head tilted down toward her phone. Jack's elbow clipped her arm, and the cup flew from his hand like it had grown wings. The sound was unmistakable, the splatter of liquid hitting soft leather, followed by a sharp inhale and the collective gasp of the morning crowd. Hot latte coated her bag, dripping down the sides of what was, unmistakably, very expensive designer leather. Jack's stomach dropped. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out at first. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," he finally managed, grabbing a stack of napkins and rushing toward her. The woman blinked, looked down at her now stained bag, then back at him. Her expression was unreadable, no anger, no outrage, just a kind of amused disbelief. "It's just coffee," she said calmly, then she laughed. Jack froze mid-wipe. She looked at him, green eyes warm with mischief. "It's just money," she added, flicking a damp strand of hair over her shoulder. "You okay?" Jack stared at her. He was soaked in regret, embarrassment, and caffeine. "I think I owe you a new bag," he muttered. She smiled. "Or maybe just a fresh cup." Jack stood there, half stunned, napkins clutched in one hand like a white flag. The last time someone spilled coffee on a stranger in this cafe, it ended with threats, a mop bucket, and someone swearing they'd sue. But this woman, this effortlessly put-together woman, in a pale wool coat, latte dripping from her designer handbag, was laughing. Not the awkward, polite kind of laugh either, a real one. Soft, a little surprised, like even she couldn't believe it. "I really didn't mean to," Jack began again, but she waved him off. "You looked like you needed that coffee more than I needed this bag," she said, eyeing the ruined leather with a mild shrug. "Honestly, I hated this thing anyway. Too many compartments, like carrying a filing cabinet." Jack blinked. "That's generous." "It's just money," she said again, as if she were talking about a gum wrapper. Then she looked down at his shirt, still marked with a faded orange juice stain, and raised a brow. "Rough morning?" He laughed, just once, under his breath. "You have no idea." "Well then," she said, stepping closer, her heels tapping against the tiled floor. "How about I buy you a replacement cup?" Jack stared at her, not sure if he'd misheard. "You want to buy me coffee?" "You're the one who lost yours," she said, lips curling into a half-smile. "And judging by your expression, that was the only thing keeping you upright today." He couldn't help, Eth smiled back. "You don't have to do that." "I know, but I want to." Before he could respond, she turned to the register. "1 large latte, extra shot," she told Maya, who'd been watching the whole thing unfold like a soap opera. "And for you?" she asked Jack, teasing now. He blinked again. "That was my order." "Perfect." She reached into her wallet, pulled out a sleek black card, and handed it over without a second thought. Jack glanced at her, this woman with a $1,000 smile and a ruined purse, and wondered who on earth she was. "I'm Jack," he said, offering his hand. She shook it. "Nice to meet you, Jack. I'm Charlotte." Jack sipped the fresh latte Charlatano. Grayshot bought him, the warmth of it finally thawing some of the morning's tension from his shoulders. They'd claimed a small table near the front window, just out of reach of the rush, where the clatter of orders and espresso machines became background noise. Grace sat across from him like she belonged there, like a woman who could wear a 4-0 bag and still seem completely at ease beside a guy with worn-out boots and a juice-stained shirt. "So," he said, eyes narrowing with mock suspicion, "you're either incredibly understanding, or you've secretly destroyed more handbags than I have shirts." Grace laughed, stirring her tea with a silver spoon. "I think I've just learned not to let things own me. Bags, cars, houses, they're all replaceable." Jack tilted his head. "You say that like someone who's had to remind herself of it a lot." She looked at him for a beat too long, and then smiled. "Maybe I have." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. There was something about the way she carried herself. Not cold, not guarded, but practiced. Like she was used to being watched, used to hiding the whole story behind a flawless exterior. "And your name," he said, sipping again. "It's Charlotte?" "Middle name," she corrected. "Grace Whitmore." The last name hit him like a soft thud. Whitmore, as in Whitmore Industries. As in the real estate, tech, and something or other empire with buildings named after them in half the state. "Wait, Whitmore? Whitmore?" he asked before he could stop himself. Grace raised a brow, clearly amused. "Yes, but don't hold that against me." He blinked, unsure what to say. He'd just soaked the handbag of one of the richest women in the city, and she was buying him coffee? "I definitely can't afford to replace that bag," he said carefully. She shrugged. "Good. Then I won't have to pretend I liked it." Jack let out a breath and shook his head, chuckling. Grace Whitmore was supposed to be the kind of person you only saw in magazines or headlines, not sitting in a neighborhood coffee shop talking to a guy like him as if none of it mattered. But here she was, and for some reason she hadn't walked away. Jack hadn't planned to sit for more than 5 minutes. He'd meant to thank her, sip his replacement latte, and slip back behind the counter before Maya killed him. But time had a way of bending when Grace Whitmore was talking. What started with small talk, weather, shoes, the eternal mystery of why good coffee was always overpriced, turned into something else. She was sharp, but not sharp-edged. Funny in a way that didn't feel rehearsed. And curious, like she actually wanted to hear what Jack had to say, instead of just waiting for her turn to speak. "So you work here full-time?" she asked, folding her hands neatly around her teacup. Jack hesitated. "Technically part-time. The other half of my day is fixing cars out of a borrowed garage on the east side. It's not glamorous, but it keeps the lights on. Mechanic and barista," she mused. "That's got indie film written all over it." He smirked. "Only if you include the part where I spend most of my week elbow deep in someone's radiator while trying to remember if I paid the water bill." Grace laughed again, eyes sparkling. "Real life. I like it." Jack watched her over the rim of his cup, still trying to wrap his head around her. Most people with her kind of money, and he'd met a few in passing, carried themselves like they were balancing a crown on their heads. Grace didn't. She asked about Lily like she meant it. She leaned in when he talked, not away. And when she laughed, it wasn't to be polite, it was because she actually thought something was funny. Still, he couldn't help but wonder what the catch was. People like her didn't just linger in places like this. They didn't laugh off ruined designer bags or offer to buy replacement coffees. And they definitely didn't spend the better part of an hour chatting with exhausted single dads who hadn't seen the inside of a dry cleaner in months. He glanced at the clock, surprised to see the hands creeping toward 10. "You've been here a while," he said. Grace looked out the window, unbothered. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm starting to think maybe that's a good thing." The park was Jack's go-to, when the world felt like too much, when bills piled up, when the car made that strange noise again, or when Lily needed to run off the energy that boiled beneath her tiny frame. The swing set was rusted, the benches uneven, and the grass patchy in spots, but it was theirs. Familiar. Predictable. He didn't expect to see Grace there. She was sitting alone on a worn bench near the duck pond, legs crossed, a book in her lap she didn't seem to be reading. Her coat was different navy this time, but unmistakably high-end. Still, she looked more relaxed than she had in the cafe, less curated. Lily spotted her first. "Hey, it's the coffee lady!" Before Jack could say a word, Lily was halfway across the grass, her ponytail bouncing behind her. Grace looked up, surprised, but when she saw the little girl barreling toward her, her face lit up with genuine warmth. "Hello again," she said as Lily stopped in front of her, grinning. Jack jogged up a few seconds later, breathless and mildly mortified. "Sorry, she's not exactly shy." Grace laughed. "It's okay. I was hoping to run into you again. Though, maybe not so literally this time." Lily climbed up onto the bench beside her like they'd known each other for years. "My dad says you have fancy purses and laugh at spilled coffee." "Sounds like your dad's a very honest man," Grace said, shooting Jack a sly look. He rubbed the back of his neck. "She's a better storyteller than I am." For the next half hour, the three of them sat there, Lily chattering about school and favorite ice cream flavors, Grace listening like it was the most fascinating conversation in the world. Jack watched the two of them, something twisting gently in his chest. It was strange. The way Grace leaned down to hear Lily better. The way Lily kept scooting closer. How easy it all felt. Two worlds, one weathered bench. And for a moment, it didn't matter who came from where. They were just there. Together. Grace sat at the edge of her hotel suite that evening, staring out at the town's modest skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that didn't belong in a place this small. Below, the lights of Main Street flickered like a quieter version of the life she'd left behind in the city. She still wore the navy coat from earlier, now draped over the back of the chair, faintly smelling of grass, and the cheap vanilla ice cream Lily had begged her to taste. She hadn't meant to stay that long in the park. Hadn't planned to sit beside a single dad and his wide-eyed daughter, listening to stories about third-grade drama and the intricacies of monkey bar politics. But she'd stayed. And that unsettled her, more than she wanted to admit. Her phone buzzed. Again, third time in 10 minutes. "Dad, board meeting in Manhattan next week. You're expected. Angela, assistant. The interview with Forbes is still tentatively set for Friday. Please confirm. Mother, saw photos. You looked pale. Are you okay?" Grace locked the screen and set the phone face down on the table, as if that would somehow keep the rest of her life from finding its way in. She hadn't told Jack anything. Not really. Not about her family. Not about Whitmore Holdings, or the legacy built on half-truths and buyouts. Not about the pressure to smile on cue, to make deals over cocktails, to date appropriate men with degrees and pedigrees. Men who could quote stock prices but didn't know how to make a kid laugh or fix a broken swing. Jack didn't ask questions, and she hadn't offered. It wasn't dishonesty, it was survival. Because the moment she said who she really was, everything would shift. It always did. She would stop being Grace, the woman with the stained purse and the sarcastic charm, and start being Grace Whitmore, the daughter of a man whose name opened doors and closed conversations. In the park, Jack hadn't looked at her like she was a brand. He'd looked at her like she was real. And the terrifying truth was, she didn't want that to end. Jack stood in the kitchen long after Lily had gone to bed, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. The clock above the stove blinked 8 p.m. He should have been asleep an hour ago. He had an early shift at the garage tomorrow, followed by a long afternoon at the Café Beau. Instead, he leaned against the counter, a half-finished cup of coffee growing cold in his hand, and he was thinking about Grace. It wasn't just her laugh or the way she'd listened to Lily like every word mattered. It was something quieter. The way she didn't flinch at the rusted bench or the sticky remnants of a park popsicle. The way she looked Jack in the eye, like she wasn't looking past him, like he wasn't just another face in the background. That was dangerous. He didn't get to think about women like her. Not seriously. She belonged to another world, a world of penthouse views and last names that meant something. Jack's world was overdue bills, used shoes, and repairing brake pads for customers who paid in cash and IOUs. He glanced at the small drawings Lily had taped to the fridge. crayon hearts, lopsided suns, and a picture of the three of them on the park bench, Grace included. It was just a scribble in purple marker, but Jack's heart stuttered all the same. It had been a long time since he'd let someone in. Since Melissa. Since grief turned everything into survival, he thought about texting Grace. Just a, "Hey," or maybe a, "Thanks for today." But the phone stayed on the table, untouched. What would he even say? That he couldn't stop thinking about the way her hair caught the light? That he liked the way she didn't fill silences with noise? He ran a hand through his hair and laughed under his breath. What was he doing? Dreaming about a woman who probably had meetings with CEOs and a closet worth more than his yearly income? Still, when he finally dragged himself to bed, it wasn't numbers, or work, or stress that filled his head. It was her smile, and the warmth it left behind. The ballroom glittered under 1,000 crystal lights, every surface polished to a blinding shine. Grace stood near the edge of the crowd, a champagne flute in hand, wearing a midnight blue gown that fit like it had been sewn onto her. Around her, the air buzzed with polite laughter, clinking glasses, and the subtle maneuvering of people who spoke in deals and dinner invitations. This was her world, or at least, the one she'd been born into. The Whitmore Foundation Gala was an annual affair, lavish, strategic, and crawling with power players. Every inch of the event was designed to impress. The art installations flown in from Milan, the custom menu curated by a celebrity chef, the donor list stacked with politicians, CEOs, and heirs. Grace had attended since she was old enough to walk in heels. She used to love it. Or, she thought she did. Now, it just felt exhausting. "Grace, darling." Her mother's voice floated in from behind her, warm and clipped at the same time. "Come meet the Renford's son. He just made partner at the firm in Boston." Of course he did. Grace turned, pasted on her best society smile, and greeted the young man standing stiffly in a designer tux. He was attractive in a polished, forgettable sort of way. He shook her hand like it was a business deal, then launched into a dry monologue about mergers. Grace nodded politely, her eyes already drifting. She thought about Jack. About grease-streaked hands, chipped coffee mugs, and the way he smiled sideways when he was trying not to. About Lily's messy drawings and the honesty in their little home, the kind that couldn't be bought or staged. Someone handed her a new glass of champagne. Another man approached, this one trying far too hard to impress her with his latest real estate venture. Her father watched from across the room, nodding approvingly as she smiled through another conversation she didn't care about. They didn't know about Jack, or Lily, or that Grace had spent her afternoon sitting on a park bench listening to a little girl talk about dinosaurs while her dad fixed her shoelace without missing a beat. They wouldn't understand. Because in this world, appearances were everything. And Grace was starting to realize she didn't want to wear the mask anymore. The water went cold halfway through Jack's shower. He stood under the icy stream, teeth clenched, as a familiar dread crept into his chest. It wasn't the first time the ancient water heater had given out. It rattled and hissed more than it actually worked, but something about this morning felt heavier. Maybe it was because Lily had a field trip today and needed lunch money he didn't have. Maybe it was because the garage hadn't paid him yet for the last 2 jobs. Or maybe it was because his phone had buzzed earlier with a message he'd ignored. Notice: utility payment failed. Please remit within 48 hours to avoid service interruption. Jack toweled off in silence, staring at his reflection in the fogged mirror. Unshaven, exhausted, still wearing the stress from yesterday's double shift. He pulled on jeans and a threadbare hoodie before heading to the kitchen, where Lily sat with a bowl of cereal and a paper crown she'd made the night before. "Dad, can you put my apple in the field trip bag?" He nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, sweetheart." As she chattered about butterflies and nature hikes, Jack moved quietly, counting cash in his head, trying to figure out what could wait: groceries, the water heater, maybe the oil change he definitely couldn't afford. His phone buzzed again. Garage manager. "Checks delayed until Monday." "Sorry, man. You know how it is." Yeah, he knew. He dropped the apple into Lily's bag and zipped it shut, the weight of it somehow heavier than it should be. He thought of Grace, her easy laugh, and that ridiculous, ruined handbag. The way she'd leaned in close to Lily without hesitation. For a second, it had felt like something possible. Like the universe was offering him something rare and bright. But mornings like this reminded him where he stood. Jack knelt by Lily and brushed her hair back gently. "Hey," he said. "No matter what, you know we're okay, right?" She nodded with a smile too big for her age. "Because we're Team Harris." Jack kissed her forehead and stood. Fairy tales were fine for bedtime. But the water was cold, the bills were due, and the real world didn't care how charming someone's smile was. The text came just after noon, right as Jack was elbow-deep in a 20-year-old pickup truck that smelled like old French fries and regret. "Grace, random question, are you and Lily free this Saturday?" Jack blinked, wiped a streak of grease across his arm, and stared at the screen like it might vanish if he looked away. He hadn't heard from her in a few days, not since the park bench and the quiet way she'd watched Lily draw, like she didn't want the moment to end. He hadn't expected anything more. People like Grace didn't circle back. They drifted off into penthouses and galas. But here she was. "Jack, maybe. Depends on how many things break this week." "Why?" Her response was almost instant. "Grace. There's a fall fair just outside town. Rides, music, cotton candytho works. I thought Lily might like it." "You too." He stared at the message a moment longer than necessary. It was the kind of invitation you didn't expect from someone who'd spent her last Saturday sipping champagne with people named Bradford and Sterling. But there it was, simple, sincere. Later that evening, after Lily finished her math worksheet and curled up with a comic book, Jack brought it up. "Hey, Bug, what do you think about a fair this weekend?" "With Grace." Lily's eyes lit up. "The coffee lady?" Jack smiled. "Yeah, she thought you might like it. She's fun. Can we go? Please, Dad?" He hesitated, calculating the cost of admission. Snacks, gas. The budget was tight, tighter than ever. But the look on Lily's face reminded him why he worked 2 jobs and still found time to tape glitter projects together at midnight. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, we can go." Saturday came with clear skies and the scent of kettle corn drifting on the breeze. The fairgrounds were alive with color and laughter. Jack spotted Grace by the ticket booth, dressed in jeans and sneakers, her hair tucked beneath a baseball cap. She smiled when she saw them, wide, unguarded, like she was genuinely happy they came. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. No last names, no expectations. Just 3 people, a crisp October sky, and the start of something real. The Ferris wheel creaked as it climbed, the soft hum of fairground music drifting upward with the breeze. Jack sat across from Grace, the metal seat swaying gently beneath them. Below, Lily waved from the ground with cotton candy in one hand, and her other firmly tucked into the grip of an elderly ride operator who'd promised to keep an eye on her while they rode the big one. Grace smiled down at her. "She's fearless." Jack nodded, watching his daughter shrink into the sea of families and food stalls. "Takes after her mom," he said softly, then glanced at Grace. "But the stubbornness? That's all me." The corners of Grace's mouth lifted. "I like her stubbornness." They rode in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel empty, just peaceful. The wind tousled Grace's hair, and she didn't bother to smooth it down. She leaned back, eyes drifting over the fairgrounds, then out toward the trees beyond town, where the autumn leaves had begun to blush orange and red. Jack studied her face when she wasn't looking. There was something different about her up here, away from the noise and sparkle of both the fair and her usual world. No makeup tricks, no designer mask. Just Grace real, a little windswept, and impossibly grounded for someone who came from the clouds. "You ever do stuff like this?" he asked. "You know, fairs, rides, standing in line for funnel cake?" She shook her head. "Not really. My world's more Catered galas and formal dinners with 3 forks. And you picked this instead? Grace turned to him, eyes soft. I didn't want quiet. I wanted honest. Jack looked away, heart thudding, a little louder than it should have. The wheel reached its peak, and for a breathless moment the entire world stilled. Just sky and wind, and something blooming in the silence between them. I don't know what this is, he said quietly, unsure if he was confessing or warning. Grace reached across the seat and took his hand. Her touch light, but sure. Me neither, she said. But I don't want it to stop, and neither did he. The town car waited at the edge of the fairgrounds, too sleek and too polished for the gravel lot. Grace slid into the back seat, cheeks still warm from the Ferris wheel ride, and the quiet way Jack had looked at her when she reached for his hand. She could still feel the weight of his fingers in hers, like they'd somehow fit accidentally, perfectly. The door clicked shut behind her, and the illusion cracked. Didn't realize your Saturday plans involved bumper cars, said a voice from the front seat. Grace didn't even flinch. Nice to see you too, Emma. Emma Tate, Grace's assistant, / fixer, turned halfway in her seat, tablet in hand, glasses pushed high on her nose. Efficient, loyal, and utterly humorless when it came to Grace's personal choice, especially when those choices involved men without business cards or boardroom connections. I've rescheduled Monday's investor call and moved the Brussels meeting to remote, Emma said briskly. Also, your mother left 5 voicemails. She's seen the photos. Grace stiffened. What photos? Emma angled her tablet so Grace could see. A grainy shot-nothing scandalous of her at the fair. Laughing, holding Jack's hand on the Ferris wheel. Lily trailing beside them with a giant stuffed giraffe. Someone recognized you, Emma said. Small towns have cameras too, Grace. Even if they don't flash. Grace sighed, dragging a hand through her hair. It was one afternoon. Emma leaned in slightly, her voice lower, sharper. One afternoon with a man your father will label unvetted. A single father who fixes cars and works at a coffee shop. You know how this goes. Grace stared out the window, jaw tight. The fairgrounds were fading behind them, now distant lights, and music becoming memories already. Maybe I don't care what my father thinks, she said. Emma didn't blink. You always say that, and then the pressure hits, and you fold because you think that's what loyalty looks like. There was no malice in her tonally weary truth. Grace didn't respond. But deep down, she knew Emma was right about one thing. The Whitmores would never approve of Jack Harris. And that meant the clock was ticking on this beautiful, impossible thing. The newspaper was only there because the Wi-Fi at the cafe had gone down. Jack stood behind the counter at Brew Bean, waiting for the espresso machine to reboot, when the rustle of old newsprint caught his eye. Maya kept a small stack near the pastry case for the older customers, who didn't do apps or screens. Normally, Jack didn't bother. Today, he was bored enough to flip through it. The headline stopped him cold. Whitmore heiress sparks stir with small-town disappearance. Grace Whitmore spotted outside city limits. Family silent. There she was, right on the front page. Grace, in a candid shot. Mid-laugh as Grace hair wind-tossed and eyes bright. And beside her in the photo, unmistakably, him. Or at least, the blurred shape of him, holding Lily's hand. Jack read the article twice, the words sinking in slowly. Billion-dollar empire. Real estate. Tech acquisitions. Political fundraisers. Heiress. Disappearance. The tone wasn't hostile, but it dripped with the same polished condescension he'd seen in luxury showrooms Sam used, that someone like her would spend time with someone like him. He sank onto the nearest stool, the paper still in hand. She hadn't told him, not really. He'd known Whitmore sounded familiar, but she'd downplayed it, shrugged it off like it didn't matter. But it did matter. She wasn't just a woman with a fancy purse and a kind smile. She was Grace Whitmore, whose family name opened doors he'd never be allowed to stand in front of, whose life was built on inheritances and invitations that came embossed in gold. And Jack? He was a paycheck away from losing heat in the house. He made lunches out of leftovers and squeezed every dollar for groceries and gas. He fixed cars for people who couldn't afford mechanics, and lived a life stitched together with hope and duct tape. His stomach twisted. Had he really thought this could go somewhere? Jack folded the paper in half, slid it back onto the counter, and rubbed his hands over his face. Maybe Grace had been real with him. Maybe her laugh, her hand in his, had meant something. But now he wasn't sure if any of it had ever been on equal ground. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Grace walked in. Jack was wiping down tables, though the place was already spotless. He hadn't responded to her text, not the light ones, not the one that just said, "Can we talk?" But when the door chimed and she stepped inside, he didn't turn her away. He didn't say much at all. She sat down at a corner table, the same one they'd shared after he spilled coffee on her bag. Back when things had been simpler. Back when the truth hadn't caught up. Jack approached slowly, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "I saw the paper." Grace nodded. "I figured you would." He didn't sit. "I'm sorry," she said, voice quiet. "I should have told you from the start, about who I am, about what my name means." "Yeah," Jack said, not harsh, just honest. "You should have." She looked down at her hands, fingers twisting the sleeve of her sweater. "I didn't hide it to trick you. I didn't want to lead with that. I didn't want you to look at me and see headlines or money, or the mess that comes with all of it. And what did you want me to see?" She looked up then, eyes glassy but clear. "Me, just me." Jack sat finally, arms resting on the table. "You've got a family that builds empires. I've got one toolbox and a leaky roof. You can disappear to a penthouse. I can't even take a weekend off. You didn't think that might matter?" "It does matter," Grace admitted. "But not in the way you think. My family. My name, it's heavy. It decides things before I even walk into a room. And with you, I felt like I could breathe. Like I could choose something for me." They sat there, in silence for a beat, the air thick with things unsaid. "I wasn't looking to fall into anything," she said. "But then there was you, and Lily, and this life, one I didn't know I wanted until it was right in front of me." Jack studied her, his jaw tight. He didn't know what to do with all of it, the truth, the hurt, the way his chest still pulled toward her even when his brain screamed caution. "I just wanted real," he said. Grace reached across the table, her hand warm against his. "So did I." Jack didn't sleep that night. He lay on the worn couch in the living room, the TV still humming low with some late-night rerun, but he hadn't registered a single word. Lily was asleep in the next room, clutching her stuffed llama, the house quiet except for the creaks of old wood settling in the dark. Grace's words echoed in his head. "I just wanted real." But all Jack could think about was how unreal it all suddenly felt. For weeks, he'd let himself believe something impossible. That someone like her, someone with her kind of background, her kind of life, could actually want to be part of his. That maybe it didn't matter where they came from. That maybe connection wasn't about money or legacy, but about something quieter. Something simple, human. But now, he felt like a footnote, a curiosity, a moment of rebellion in a life otherwise paved with boardrooms, limos, and last names that came with weight. Had she laughed at his stories because they were funny, or because they were quaint? Had she sat on that park bench with Lily because she genuinely cared, or because it made for a good detour from whatever her world normally demanded? Jack hated the doubt. But it was there now, rooted deep and growing fast. He'd always been careful. Since Melissa passed, he'd built walls quiet, sturdy ones to keep out the chaos. Not because he didn't want to feel, but because he couldn't afford to fall apart. And Grace? She hadn't just found a crack in the wall, she'd stepped right through it. And now, everything felt unsteady. At dawn, Jack made breakfast like always. He packed Lily's lunch. He tied her shoes and kissed her forehead. But when she asked, "Are we seeing Grace again soon?" he hesitated. "Not sure, kiddo," he said softly. "We'll see." He didn't text Grace that day. Or the next. He told himself it was because he was busy. Because he needed time. But deep down, Jack wasn't sure if what they'd had was something real, or just a pause in Grace Whitmore's carefully curated life. Jack had hoped Lily would forget. Kids were resilient, right? One day someone's there, the next they're not, and life just folds around it. But Lily didn't forget. She asked about Grace the very next morning. "Is she coming to the park today?" she said, through a mouthful of cereal, kicking her legs beneath the kitchen table. "She said she'd teach me how to braid backwards." Jack froze mid-sip, coffee halfway to his lips. "No, Bug, I don't think she's coming today," Lily blinked. "Tomorrow then?" Jack forced a smile. "Maybe. She's probably really busy." Lily nodded slowly, chewing in silence for a moment. Then, "Do busy people still like you when they're busy?" That one landed like a stone in Jack's chest. He tried to shake it off, distract her with silly voices and a promise of pancakes on Saturday, but it didn't stick. Grace had been more than a visitor in their lives. She'd fit into it with this strange, easy, Grace-like, she was supposed to be there. And Lily, in all her open-hearted simplicity, had let her in completely. Throughout the week, the questions kept coming. Quietly, at first. Then with a little more confusion. "Did she go back to the city? Did I do something wrong? Are you mad at her?" Jack didn't know how to answer any of them. Because the truth was, he didn't even know how he felt. He told himself Grace had her own world to get back to. That maybe what they had wasn't built for real life. But when Lily asked, "Can we call her just to say hi?" he felt something sharp twist behind his ribs. He missed her too. He missed her laugh. Her way of looking at Lily like she was the only person in the world. The way she made him feel, not like a project, not like a detour, but like a man who still had something to give. That night, after Lily was asleep, Jack sat on the couch with his phone in hand, staring at Grace's name in his contacts. He didn't call, but for the first time, he wanted to. Grace sat in the gleaming conference room on the 42nd floor of Whitmore Tower, surrounded by polished mahogany, crystal water pitchers, and voices that droned in precise, practiced tones. The city skyline stretched endlessly outside the glass walls, but it felt more like a cage than a view. Her assistant clicked through another presentation. Projections, numbers, market expansions. Things Grace once clung to for validation now blurred at the edges. She tapped her pen rhythmically against her notepad, pretending to take notes, but her thoughts were 1,000 miles away and one small town removed. Jack. And Lily, the way Lily had beamed when she won a crooked carnival game. The way Jack's smile softened just barely when he thought she wasn't looking. The late afternoon sun warming her skin as they shared funnel cake and stories and quiet laughter. It wasn't flashy or curated. It was honest, real. And now it was gone. She'd given him space, knowing the truth hit harder than she meant it to. She'd expected anger, maybe distance, but she hadn't expected silence. Not from him, not from Lily. That part hurt in a way she didn't know how to admit to herself or anyone else. She stared at her phone screen under the table. Nothing. Not a text. Not a call. Grace had buried herself in meetings, press briefings, and white tablecloth dinners with potential investors, thinking it would numb the ache. That she could drown whatever she'd started feeling for Jack in work and responsibility. But it only made it worse. She didn't miss the spotlight. She missed the cluttered kitchen table. The cereal bowls. Lily's crayon drawings taped to the fridge. The lopsided, beautiful mess of a life that wasn't about profits or PR, but about presence. Someone in the room said her name, and Grace snapped back to the moment. Eyes sharp, posture perfect. She gave a nod, said something smart, something confident. The meeting moved on. But her heart stayed behind, stuck in a little town with a man who didn't ask her for anything but honesty and a little girl who'd offered her trust without hesitation. And the silence between them now felt louder than any boardroom ever could. Jack found the bracelet while cleaning out the back seat of the car. It had slipped between the cushions, something he wouldn't have noticed if Lily hadn't dropped her water bottle and sent him fishing for it in the first place. His fingers brushed against something soft and smooth, tangled with lint and forgotten crumbs, and when he pulled it free, his breath caught in his throat. The bracelet. Twine and wooden beads, strung together with mismatched colors, and the slightly crooked charm of something made by hand. Grace had given it to Lily the day of the fair, kneeling beside her with a playful grin and saying, "So you don't forget today." Or me. Lily had worn it every day for a week, until she misplaced it in the chaos of school mornings and bedtime stories. Jack had assumed it was lost for good. But now, there it was. Faded, a little frayed at the edges, and heartbreakingly small in his palm. He turned it over between his fingers, feeling the weight of Ida. Weight that wasn't physical, but emotional. It was a symbol of something quiet and beautiful, of a brief window where their lives had overlapped, if only for a moment. Of the way Grace had fit so seamlessly into their little world. Not as an outsider, but as if she'd always been meant to be there. He sat back on the porch steps, the bracelet resting in his palm, and watched the sun start to dip behind the trees. Lily was inside, humming to herself while she colored. And Jack felt that familiar ache settle in his chest, low and dull, but impossible to ignore. He missed her. Not just her laugh or her touch, but the presence of her. The way she'd walked into their lives, and somehow made everything feel lighter. The way Lily had lit up around her. The way Jack had, for once, started to believe in more than just getting by. He closed his hand around the bracelet, holding it gently. She had left something behind more than twine and beads. She'd left a space, and now that space felt impossible to fill. Grace didn't expect to see Ethan. Her younger brother strolled into her office, unannounced, holding 2 coffees and wearing a grin that made her suspicious. He dropped 1 cup onto her desk, flopped into the chair across from her, and propped his expensive shoes on the edge like he owned the place. Which, technically, he might someday. "Thought I'd check on you," he said casually. "You've been ghosting the family." Grace arched an eyebrow. "I've been working." Ethan sipped his coffee. "Right. You're always working when you're trying not to feel anything." She didn't respond, just leaned back in her chair and stared at him. He was younger by 3 years, a little too charming for his own good, and usually the least responsible Whitmore in the room. But he had a knack for noticing things, especially when it came to her. "I saw the article," he said after a beat. "The one with you and the mystery guy at the fair. Nice Ferris wheel shot, by the way." Grace looked away. "Let me guess, Dad's having a meltdown." "Pretty much," Ethan said with a shrug. "Mom's trying to spin it as you connecting with the public. I think Angela started drafting a statement about a charitable outreach initiative." Grace let out a dry laugh. "Of course she did." Ethan leaned forward, suddenly serious. "But I'm not here for them. I'm here because I haven't seen you like this in, I don't know, years. And I want to know if it's real." She hesitated, then nodded. "It was. It is." "Then why aren't you with him?" She sighed. "Because it's complicated. Because I didn't tell him everything. Because his world and mine are only different if you let them be." Grace stared at him. "You've spent your whole life doing what this family expects," Ethan said. "But for once, it looks like you found something that makes you happy. So, maybe, just maybe, you should fight for it." Grace swallowed hard, her throat tight. It was the first time anyone in her family had said those words to her, and hearing themes specially from Ethan made her wonder what she was still waiting for. The garage was quiet, except for the soft clink of tools being put away, and the occasional creak of the overhead door settling for the night. Jack stood by the open bay, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that had seen better days, while the chill of late evening crept in through the cracks. Across from him, Ben leaned against the tool bench, sipping from a bottle of cheap beer and watching Jack like he was waiting for him to crack. "You're thinking about her again," Ben said finally. Jack didn't deny it. He just kept folding the rag over and over, trying to pretend his heart hadn't been stuck somewhere between memory and regret for the past 2 weeks. Ben tilted his head. "Look, man, I get it. She's from a different world. But since when has that stopped you from doing what feels right?" Jack sighed. "It's not about her world. It's about mine. You think she wants to sign up for leaky faucets and frozen dinners? She's Grace Whitmore, Ben. Her family probably has their own zip code." Ben nodded slowly. "And yet, she sat on a broken park bench with your kid for 2 hours and ate cotton candy like it was a Michelin-starred dessert." That got a small smile out of Jack. Ben stepped closer, voice softer now. "You know what I saw? I saw Lily happy. I saw you happy. Like really happy for the first time since Melissa." Jack looked down, throat tight. Ben set his bottle aside and clapped a hand on Jack's shoulder. "You've been surviving for so long, you forgot what it feels like to live. Maybe she doesn't stay. Maybe it doesn't work. But what if it does? What if this isn't some fluke, Jack? What if this is your second chance?" The question hung heavy in the air. Jack didn't answer. But later that night, after Lily was asleep and the house had gone still, he pulled out his phone. No hesitation this time. He found Grace's name, took a breath, and hit call. The city hadn't changed. Same towering glass buildings, same impatient cab horns echoing through narrow streets. But as Jack stepped out of the elevator and into the gleaming lobby of Whitmore Industries, soaked to the bone and dripping on the polished marble floor, he felt like he'd landed on another planet. A receptionist in a headset blinked at him. "Sir, can I help you?" "I'm here for Grace Whitmore," he said, pushing damp hair from his forehead. "She doesn't know I'm coming. Could you just tell her Jack Harris is here?" The receptionist hesitated, clearly weighing whether she should call security or not, but then picked up the phone. Jack stood awkwardly in the center of the lobby, jeans clinging to his legs, water pooling around his boots. A businessman in a tailored suit gave him a sideways glance. Jack ignored it. He was done worrying about how he looked or what people thought. He was here for her. 5 minutes later, the elevator dinged open again, and there she was. Grace. She looked like a storm in a silk blouse, graceful, composed, but with something wild in her eyes the moment they met his. Her heels clicked across the tile, and for a second, neither of them spoke. "You're soaked," she said finally, eyes wide. "Forgot my umbrella," Jack replied with a crooked smile. "Didn't plan to come. I just needed to." She stepped closer, her voice lower. "Jack, what are you doing here?" "I've been running from this," he said, gesturing vaguely between them. "From you. From what this could be. I thought I had to protect Lily, protect myself. But I think what I was really afraid of was being happy." Grace's throat moved as she swallowed, her expression unreadable. "I miss you," he said simply. "And I don't care about the headlines or your last name or how many zeros are in your bank account. I just care that it was real. That you were." The lobby had fallen quiet. Grace stepped forward, eyes shining. "You're an idiot," she whispered. "Yeah," he said. "But I'm here." She didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around him, rein and all, and just like that, the distance between them disappeared. They ended up in a quiet corner office, high above the city, far from the polished marble and watchful eyes below. Jack's jacket hung over a chair, still damp, and Grace had kicked off her heels without a second thought. She sat across from him, legs curled beneath her, a mug of tea cradled in her hands like armor. No pretense, no performance, just them. "I was scared," Jack said, staring out at the rain streaking down the floor, to ceiling windows. "Not of you, but of what you made me feel. I haven't let anyone in for a long time. Not since Lily's mom." Grace looked down. "You don't have to explain." "No, I do." He turned to her, eyes steady. "You walked into my life and made it brighter. And I kept telling myself it was temporary. That you'd leave eventually, because that's what people do when they find out what my life actually looks like." She smiled faintly. "I know what your life looks like, and I stayed, didn't I?" "You did," he said quietly. "And I almost threw it away because I thought I wasn't enough." Grace set her mug down. "I've spent my whole life being told what's enough. Enough poise. Enough achievement. Enough control. I was raised to believe that love was something you earned by being perfect. And for the first time, with you, I didn't feel like I had to earn anything." Jack watched her, his heart twisting. "You made me feel like being me was enough," she continued. "I didn't tell you everything at first, because I didn't want to lose that. I didn't want you to look at me like everyone else does." "I never looked at you like that," Jack said. "I looked at you like someone who made my daughter laugh, who sat on a park bench with us like it mattered." And it did. They sat in the quiet, letting the rain fill the spaces between their words. Then Grace reached across the table, her fingers threading through his. "Can we start from right here?" she asked. Jack nodded, no hesitation this time. "Yeah," he said. "Right here sounds perfect." The scent of motor oil and old rubber hung thick in the air, familiar and grounding. Jack's garage wasn't much to look at: concrete floor, mismatched toolboxes, a broken vending machine that only dispensed root beer, but it was his. It was real. And today, Grace was standing right in the middle of it, completely out of place and somehow not out of place at all. She wore a cream-colored blouse, dark jeans, and heels far too expensive for the oil-streaked floor beneath them. Within 5 minutes, one of those heels slipped on a patch of grease, and she grabbed Jack's arm with a startled yelp. He caught her easily. "Careful," he said with a smirk. "This isn't exactly Whitmore Tower." Grace looked down at the smudge now staining the side of her shoe. Clearly, but then she laughed a full, rich, unguarded laugh that echoed through the garage like music. Jack couldn't help but grin. "Your laugh's louder than the lift," he said, nodding toward the ancient car jack squealing behind them. "I haven't laughed like that in, I don't know, years," Grace admitted, still smiling. "It feels good." Jack handed her a shop rag, and she made a half-hearted attempt to wipe the grease away, then shrugged and tossed it back. "Lost cause," she said. "But worth it." He gestured to the old radio near his workbench. "We've got classic rock or country, depending on whether my assistant's in a breakup mood. And if you're here past 5, the vending machine might give you a soda." Grace raised a brow. "Luxury. This is as glamorous as it gets, Whitmore." She stepped closer, eyes soft now. "Then it's my kind of glamorous." Jack didn't speak. He just looked at her hair slightly windblown from the open garage door, a streak of grease on her wrist, heels stained but still standing tall. She didn't belong here by anyone's standards. And yet, she did. Not because she fit in, but because she wasn't trying to. This wasn't a fairy tale. There were no castles. Just lug nuts, long hours, and second chances. But Grace didn't need magic. She just needed real, and here, with Jack, she'd finally found it. Jack adjusted the collar of his one good dress shirt for the 3rd time, feeling like it was strangling him just a little more with each passing second. His reflection in the mirror looked sharp enough: clean shave, neat hair, sleeves rolled once like he couldn't quite commit to full formality. But underneath, nerves churned like a bad engine. Lily twirled behind him, her simple navy dress flaring out at the hem. "Do rich people have mac and cheese?" she asked, wide-eyed. Jack smiled faintly. "Not the kind that comes in a box." She frowned. "Then why are we going?" Jack crouched to fix the tiny clip in her hair. "Because Grace asked us. And sometimes, when someone matters, you show oop heaven when it's uncomfortable." Lily wrinkled her nose. "Like a dentist. Exactly like a dentist." When they arrived, the Whitmore estate looked like a museum. Massive columns, immaculate hedges, a front door big enough to have its own address. Jack held Lily's hand tighter than usual. Grace greeted them just inside, radiant in a dark green dress that somehow made Jack feel overdressed and underdressed at the same time. She beamed when she saw them and knelt to Lily's level. "You look beautiful," she said. Lily grinned. "I brought a drawing for you." Then this night's already perfect. The formal dining room was a sea of white linen, polished silver, and stairs. Grace's parents were already seated, flanked by people who had the kind of posture Jack hadn't seen since his wedding. Wine glasses shimmered like they'd never touched actual fingerprints. The conversations were clipped, polite, and full of names Jack didn't recognize, and companies he'd never heard of. Grace introduced them, voice confident but calm. Jack shook hands that felt like tests, endured smiles that didn't reach eyes. And still, he kept Lily close and Grace closer. Things went mostly fine until Lily, halfway through a very elaborate salad, leaned toward Grace's mother and asked, "Do you ever wear sweatpants?" The table went dead silent. Grace laughed, loudly. And then, somehow, so did her brother. Even her father cracked a thin smile. And just like that, the tension broke. Jack caught Grace's eye from across the table. She winked. Maybe this wouldn't be a disaster after all. Dessert arrived like a diplomatic offering, perfectly plated tiramisu, each square dusted with cocoa, so precisely it looked airbrushed. Jack stared at his, trying not to smudge the fancy linen napkin he hadn't quite figured out how to use properly. Lily, seated beside him, poked her dessert with a silver spoon, as if waiting for it to talk. Across the table, Grace's mother smiled tightly, the kind of smile that said she was trying, or pretending. Jack wasn't sure which. Her father, meanwhile, seemed carved from stone suit immaculate, expression unreadable. Conversation had stumbled through polite questions and clipped anecdotes, each exchange landing with the weight of a job interview. Jack answered every question carefully, aware of the subtle judgment in every glance. And Gracious held her composure like a lifeline, fielding her parents' veiled concerns with grace that belied the tension radiating through her shoulders. Jack wasn't mad. He'd expected this. He was a grease-stained mechanic with a mortgage he could barely cover. They were Whitmore's. His being here was, in their world, an anomaly. Then Lily leaned forward, fork in hand, and said brightly, "This cake tastes like it's trying too hard." The table froze. Grace choked on her wine, barely stifling a laugh. Jack blinked. Her mother stared at Lily as if the child had just performed opera. Then, suddenly, Grace's brother Ethan burst out laughing. "It does taste like that," he said. "Like someone overthought dessert." Lily shrugged, completely unbothered. "My dad makes brownies from a box. They don't try so hard, and they're really good." For the first time all evening, something shifted. Grace's father coughed, not quite a laugh, but close. Her mother's expression softened, just a little. And Grace, still half laughing, reached across the table and ruffled Lily's hair. "Box brownies for the win," she said. Jack looked around, surprised. The room felt warmer. Not quite comfortable, but no longer so sharp. Tension had given way to something almost human. All because of one honest, sugar-coated truth from a 6-year-old who couldn't care less about legacy. And for the first time that night, Jack let himself breathe. The guests had long gone. The house was quiet now, stripped of clinking glasses and empty charm. Grace stood in the grand hallway, heels in one hand, the other clenched at her side. Jack and Lily waited by the front door, jackets in place. Their presence a quiet reminder of everything that mattered and everything she could lose if she didn't speak up. Her father entered first, still composed, jacket buttoned, tie pristine. Her mother followed, expression cool, guarded. Grace's heart beat in her throat, but she didn't waver. "I need to say something," she said, her voice steady, clear. Her parents exchanged a glance. "I know this evening wasn't what you expected," she began. "And I know you don't approve not of Jack, not of this. But I'm done living according to your expectations." Her mother's mouth tightened. "Grace." "No," Grace interrupted, gentle but firm. "You've built a life where appearances matter more than honesty, where control is love, but Jack doesn't ask me to be perfect. He sees me. He chooses me, even when I don't make it easy." Her father's jaw twitched. "You don't belong in that world, Grace. It's not who you are." "It's exactly who I am," she said, eyes locked on his. "Because for once, I'm not choosing based on legacy or image, I'm choosing based on love." The words hung heavy in the air. "You raised me to be strong, to lead," she continued. "So let me lead my own damn life." For a moment, no one moved. Her parents stood silent, stunned, not because she was yelling, but because she wasn't. Because she was calm, resolute, and unshakably sure. Then she turned, walked back to Jack and Lily, and slipped her hand into his. "You ready?" Jack asked quietly. She nodded. More than ever. As they stepped outside, into the crisp night air, Grace didn't look back. She didn't need their permission anymore. She had already chosen her path. And this time, she wasn't walking it alone. The first time Jack saw the sign go up, he didn't quite believe it was real. Harris Co. Auto Repair Honest Work. No nonsense. It wasn't fancy, just clean, simple, painted in deep navy with white block lettering. But to Jack, it looked like a banner planted in solid ground. His ground. The garage still smelled like oil and rust. Still had the same cracked concrete floor and toolbox drawers that stuck when it rained. But now there were new lifts, better lighting, a proper waiting area with coffee that didn't taste like despair. It wasn't a handout. Grace had offered help carefully, quietly, with no strings attached. She never called it an investment, though that's what it was. But more than the money, she offered believer, steady, unwavering kind. The kind that showed up at 6 a.m. on opening day with Lily in tow and a box of donuts labeled, "For the Heroes of Maplewood's Engines." Jack had made sure it all came together on his terms. Local crew. Fair wages. No overpriced gimmicks or gold-plated logos. Just honest work for people like him. People who couldn't afford 5-day wait times or padded bills. Ben handled the front desk now. Lily had claimed a stool in the back corner where she supervised, usually with crayons and a juice box. Grace came by when she could, sometimes in heels, sometimes in sneakers, always with a smile that made Jack's heart do things he didn't like to admit out loud. He still did the dirty work. Still ended most days with sore hands and grease under his nails. But now, he looked up and saw something he hadn't in a long time. Pride. Purpose. Grace leaned against the open garage door that afternoon, watching him realign a tire while Lily gave helpful commentary. When he wiped his hands and walked over, she handed him a lemonade and nodded toward the sign. "You made this happen," she said. Jack shook his head. "We did." She smiled, slipping her hand into his, and for the first time, Jack let himself believe it. This wasn't just a lucky streak or a brief fairy tale. It was a life. And it was just getting started. Grace never thought she'd miss the sound of someone stepping on a Lego, but there it was Jack, hopping on one foot in the kitchen, muttering under his breath while Lily laughed so hard she nearly choked on her juice. The morning sun filtered through the windows of their modest house, catching dust motes in the air and warming the scent of burnt toast that lingered like a signature. Grace stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with a confidence she hadn't earned. The first one was already too dark, the second oddly shaped, and Lily had dubbed them lumpy but lovable. Jack had declared them edible with only minimal hesitation. It was a far cry from the sleek silence of her penthouse kitchen marble counters, smart appliances, the hum of nothing and no one. Back there, everything was perfect. But here was home. The weekends were her favorite now. No schedules, no meetings, no pretending. Just mismatched mugs, early morning cartoons, and the chaos of two people who didn't care that she couldn't poach an egg to save her life. Grace had traded heels for socks with tiny strawberries on them, boardroom chairs for couch cushions stacked into forts. The silence she once filled with press calls was now replaced by the music of everyday life. Lily's giggles, Jack's off-key humming, the occasional thud of a dropped wrench in the garage, and it felt right. After breakfast, Grace stepped outside with her coffee, watching Jack chase Lily around the yard with a squirt bottle in one hand and zero intention of winning. She smiled, wrapping the oversized flannel shirt tighter around her, one she'd stolen from Jack weeks ago and never planned to return. He caught her looking and jogged over, breathless and grinning, hair a mess. "We good on pancakes?" "Burnt, lumpy, and already devoured." "Perfect," he said, leaning in for a quick kiss. Grace closed her eyes, letting herself feel all of it. The joy, the noise, the life. She hadn't just changed her address. She'd found something she didn't know she'd been missing. Not just a house. Not just a man. A place where she belonged. A place called home. The juice box exploded with an impressive splat, sending a cascade of sticky apple spray across the picnic blanket and directly onto Jack's faded t-shirt. Lily gasped, mid-bite of her peanut butter sandwich. "Uh-oh, that was not on purpose." Jack looked down at himself, then up at Grace, who was already covering her mouth to keep from laughing. "I swear this shirt's cursed," he muttered. "First coffee, now apple juice. What's next? Grape jelly." Grace scooted closer, wiping at the stain with a napkin that only made it worse. "Maybe it's just sentimental." He raised an eyebrow. "Sentimental?" She nodded, eyes teasing. "It was the shirt you were wearing the day we met. You know, when you crashed into me and murdered my handbag in cold brew." Jack laughed. "Oh, that memory. Still waiting for the jury to clear me of coffee slaughter." They were sprawled in the shade of a maple tree just off the edge of town, the kind of simple spot no one noticed, but always felt right. The basket beside them overflowed with sandwiches, grapes, and snacks. Lily had insisted on packing herself. A radio played softly in the background, something vintage and happy. Crumbs littered the blanket. Ants marched by like tiny soldiers. The world was quiet and perfect. Grace leaned back on her elbows, looking at the blue sky peeking through the trees. "It's funny," she said. "I used to think the big things mattered. The events, the deals, the headlines. Now it's a juice box and a stained t-shirt." Jack looked at her, soft and warm and real in the afternoon sun. "I don't think I ever knew how much I needed this kind of peace," he said, until us." Lily tossed a half-eaten cracker into the air, missed her mouth completely, and burst out laughing. "This is the best picnic ever." Grace smiled and pulled her close. "I think so too. They didn't need fireworks. They didn't need fancy dinners or front-page stories. Just this. A juice box. A lopsided sandwich. And the reminder that sometimes the littlest things are what start the biggest changes and keep love growing long after the coffee stain fades." The morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happened before Lily woke up, and the house filled with chatter and cereal crunches. Jack stood in the kitchen in his flannel pajama pants, pouring 2 mugs of coffee with a splash of cinnamon, just how Grace liked it. The sky outside was turning that soft kind of gold, and the smell of toast and fresh grounds wrapped around the room like a blanket. Grace shuffled in barefoot, hair pulled up messily, wearing one of Jack's old t-shirts. She looked like home. He handed her the mug without a word, and she accepted it with a sleepy smile. "You're up early," she murmured, curling her hands around the cup. "I had something on my mind." She raised an eyebrow, then took a sip. "Dangerous." He smirked, then reached behind him and placed something on the table. It wasn't a ring box. It was a simple white to-go cup, the kind from Brew, Bean, with her name written in Sharpie across the side. But underneath it, just below the logo, were 3 words written in his slightly crooked handwriting. "Will you marry me?" Grace blinked, then blinked again. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the mug down. "Jack, I didn't want it to be some grand gesture," he said quietly. "I didn't want suits or speeches or perfect lighting. I just wanted Usher, with coffee and toast and everything we've built. I don't have a diamond, but I have a daughter who loves you, a garage that smells like motor oil, and a life I didn't know could be this full until you walked into it." He reached for her hand, warm and steady. "So, what do you think?" Grace stared at him, eyes brimming with tears that spilled before she could stop them. "I think," she whispered, "this is the easiest yes of my life." Jack exhaled. laughing softly as he pulled her in. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, coffee cooling on the counter. No filters, no flash. Just lover awe, imperfect and forever.